Good evening, Wakefield, and welcome to our tri-board meeting of the Town Council, Finance Committee, and School Committee for 2023. I'd like to start this evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. If I could ask everyone to please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Oh, actually, CAT, do we have it up? No, thank you. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Item number 3 on the agenda is introductions. We are a very big group, so I won't do introductions. I won't put you all through that. But did just want to highlight the folks that are online today. And certainly if I miss anyone, please let me know. So from Town Council, we have myself, Councilor Julie Smith-Galvin, Maureen Butt, Mike McLean, and Bob Vincent. I don't think I see anyone else, but if I missed you, please holler. From School Committee, we have Chair Amy Lehman, Kevin Fontanella, Kevin Piscadlo, and Pete Davis. Again, if I missed anyone, please raise your hand or let me know. And then from Finance Committee, I see Amy Forsyth, Dan Sherman, Dennis Hogan, Doug Butler, Ed Bean, Ellie Zaccaro, Joe Bertrand, Stephen Chase, and Teray Howell. Again, anyone I missed there?
Yeah, Jonathan, so we do have Laurie Wheeler and John Ravenel and Brian Cusack on as well. I'm trying to bring them over, but they keep declining, so I'll keep trying.
All right. Well, thank you to them for joining us as well. Hopefully they can come on over.
And we also finally have Kevin Gill on too. And I'm still trying to bring him over.
I see Kevin. Just from a staff standpoint, we're joined by Town Administrator Steve Mayo, Sherry Dalton, the Town Council Clerk, Kevin Gill, our Town Accountant, Superintendent Doug Lyons, Christine Bufagna, the Business Administrator for the Wakefield Public Schools, and I think that is all I see. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 3, public comment. Sherry, do we have anyone from the public asking for comment today?
No, not tonight.
Okay. Great. Let's move on then to item number 4, just some opening comments. So again, I really do want to welcome everyone for being here today. This is for anyone who hasn't participated in this before. This is really our unofficial kickoff for our budgeting process for fiscal year 2025. And I can't believe I'm actually saying fiscal year 2025 here in October of 2023, but it is true. This is where we start the process. And the fact that we start the process this early is really an indication of the amount of thought and planning and scrutiny that goes into the process. And so I really want to start today by thanking everyone who's on this meeting, as well as all the folks in the school department and at Town Hall for all of the effort that goes into the process. This is a long several months of planning, but it's because of all of your dedication and hard work that we are able to assure that here in Wakefield, our financial health is strong. And as we go through the presentation tonight, one of the things that you will see is that our financial health is strong. And that's not an accident. That's because all of the people on this call and our predecessors and all of the folks that support all of our town departments have put in effort to plan for long-range sustainability for the town's budget each and every year. That's why we maintain a healthy reserve position, as we'll talk about tonight. It's also why we maintain a AAA bond rating that allows us to save a great deal of money on borrowing, particularly for large projects like the high school rebuilding project. So our charge tonight, and I think our goal as we go through this process over the next several of months, culminating in town meeting in May, is to make sure that we carry those results forward, to make sure that we maintain fiscal discipline and that we also maintain all of the future thinking investments that we need to make sure that we're meeting our town's needs. So I look forward to the discussion tonight. I look forward to the process over the months ahead. And again, really appreciate everyone's hard work as we look ahead. So with that, I'd like to invite my colleagues from School Committee and Finance Committee to offer a few opening comments. Chair Lehman, would you like to say anything?
I don't know if I wrote them as opening or closing, but I'll go for it.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Jonathan. And thank you to WCAT and the town's professional staff for enabling this meeting. We, the members of the school committee, the Wakefield Public Schools administration, teachers, and staff are passionate about and dedicated to providing the optimal scholastic experience to our students and their families. We also recognize Wakefield Public Schools benefits from the successful and efficient operation of all town departments, police, fire, health and human services, and public works, to name a few. We look forward to learning more about and engaging on the wide spectrum of opportunities and challenges before the town as we prepare for town meeting in the FY 2025 budget season. I'd like to thank those who are joining online. We hope this meeting will better your understanding of the needs of the schools and the wider town ahead of our upcoming respective council and committee meetings and ultimately town meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lehman. Mr. Butler, I know Chair Jim Sullivan from the Finance Committee is away today. Doug, do you have any comments you'd like to make on behalf of the Finance Committee? Oh, and you're on mute.
Somebody gets a bingo score there. So yes, on behalf of the Finance Committee, again, we are the board that is responsible for reviewing the budgets of both the town departments and the school departments. Just to let the people out there know that, you know, again, all of us on all of these boards, they are volunteer opportunities that we take and that we are dedicated to serve under. And we're very proud of the work that we've done. The town is in very stable financial shape, and we feel like we have delivered disciplined budgets certainly over the past, 10 or 15 years. We're ending the year with, ample free cash, and we're very pleased about that. I guess the other upside is we're an appointed board, so you all don't have to see us you don't have to vote for us every year. We get appointed by the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank my fellow FinCom members who have been dedicated and on the board. Any number of them have been on the board, 15 plus years. I think I'm only on 10 or so at this juncture, so I'm still middle of the pack. But we also have new people joining, people who get off and rejoin. We're always looking for people who want to help us. Every year there's some turnover on the Finance Committee, so please, if you're interested, please make sure you reach out when you see those vacancies posted. And again, everybody's looking for work here in America, so we're also looking. We typically have job openings. I don't think we have any now. I think we've gone into this year good and we're ready. So thank you again, and hopefully we can get through this. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Doug. So don't go anywhere. We're going to be going on to item number 5 in a moment. Just before that, I want to also recognize school committee member Tom Markham, who's joined us, as well as Assistant Superintendent Kara Morrow. So item number 5 is a review of the financial condition of the town. So Doug and Dan Sherman from Finance Committee, I believe you two are taking this. If Sherry, we can bring up the slides.
We are, Dan, I think, is leading off and taking on the first few slides on the graphs from Dan Sherman, longtime historical chair of the Finance Committee, but also chair of the forecasting subcommittee, is going to take us through the slide deck, at least the initial slides.
Thank you, Doug. So starting out with the first slide is our receipts for the year ended 23. Is a surprise for everybody. We were not expecting that kind of increase. You'll note that the total is just over $9 million. We had expected something significant less than that, Steve and Kevin were in the $7 million range. I was just over 8 million, about 8.1 million. And that was just too far off as well. The excess amount that we received, over $9 million, is really just amazing. What I want to do is highlight a couple of the spots where we did get that excess amount over our forecast. For example, the first item I might mention is the vehicle excise tax. That one usually is the one that leads us going forward and increase and so forth, but it was basically flat this year. Other excise taxes, though, was an increase of over $200,000 and about a 29% increase over the previous year, a big surprise. Fees had a 75% increase over the previous year. Although it's only about $20,000, it's still a very large percentage increase. Licenses and permits had a 67% increase over what we expected and over last year. We had an increase of almost $700,000 over the previous year for licenses and permits. And if you look around for all the building and so forth that's going on around here, it's pretty easy to see what's going on there. Another big surprise was our investment income. We have a substantial amount of money in the banks as cash, and John McCarthy is in charge of those investments, and he put a lot of it in the short-term investments, which of course had a big increase in the interest rates in the past year. And that was an increase of over $600,000 over the previous year, 1,100% increase. And even miscellaneous went from 14,000 to 32,000, 120% increase over the previous year, a big increase. So all in, we saw an increase from the previous year of 7.8 million up to 9.1 million, or 17.3% increase. A huge increase, and I'm going to get another steak dinner from Kevin.
Another? You haven't had the first one yet.
Well, that's true. That's true. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows our state aid. We had an increase in state aid for the year. It has gone past what we received back in 2002, 2003. But if you adjust for inflation, it's still woefully short of where we could be or should be in terms of state aid. But it is a nice uptick that you can see from 22 to 23. Next slide. So this one shows the stabilization fund and what it's doing. The balance now is up over $3 million. As a percentage of the budget, it's roughly at 3%. The 3% is an important number to bear in mind because we do have a policy regarding our reserves, and stabilization is one of those reserves. So it's a small decrease as a percentage. The dollar went up some, but not enough to counter the increase in our budget. Our budget went up quite a bit more than the value of that stabilization fund. So it's had a very small decrease down to about 3%. Next slide, please. Free cash. This is another one, another big surprise. And I would invite Stephen or Kevin to jump in if I've missed some of the items that really helped us out. Last May, I was predicting gloom and doom on free cash going forward. I expected that we, based on the budgets and what was being voted on and revenues and so forth, I expected it was not going to be good. 2028 or 2029, we might run out of free cash, and it would start this year. Not the case. We had a significant increase in free cash to just over $8 million, roughly 8% of our budget. Combined with the 3% from stabilization, our reserves now at about 10.8% of our budget. So slightly above the 10% target that we've got under the policy. Things that helped us free cash wise, obviously local receipts were $1 million plus over our expectations. We received just over $400,000 from the schools. Thank you very much. We also had a lot of budgets that came in under budget in terms of final numbers. For example, healthcare returned quite a bit of money. And I'll jump to Steve or Kevin to remind me what the other things that besides the healthcare came in way under budget and helped us out with free cash.
I think if I can jump in on a couple of other things, I think the departments overall, and including the school department, did a great job in returning money back to the town. And what that means for the listening public is that we set a budget in, starts July 1st and it runs all the way through June 30th the next year. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but our philosophy isn't don't spend it all if you don't need to. And our department heads are very good about being frugal during the year and returning money. As far as, and the other issue is we did not need any overdraft for snow and ice. We had a less than snowy winter and we actually returned, I think we used about $150,000 less of that budget. And let's hope that it doesn't snow again this next year because that's a big help. We also moved some unused money out of the overlay account. We put some of that into our free cash to kind of smooth that out a little bit. Again, thinking that maybe we weren't going to get these big increases that we had. On health insurance.
Yeah, right. Steve, don't forget the reserve fund transfer.
And reserve fund transfer, which we budget $400,000 for, I think we returned about $160,000 worth of that at the end of the day. So really some careful budgeting, some prudent use of ARPA funds and other grants to cover expenses during the year. And we ended up ending the year better than we had predicted. But the big two issues were the departments returning money, particularly the health insurance. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the income, the other receipts coming in, much bigger. And there's, I think we'll have another big year in building receipts because some of the big projects haven't even pulled their building permits yet. So that's a big issue there.
Yep.
And Kevin, did you miss anything?
Thank you. Next slide, please. So we've been adding to our debt service fund. That's finally getting back up to not as high as it would like it to be, but we've actually increased that quite a bit. We're now up to 1.2 million on a debt service fund. Next slide. And on capital, we've been maintaining our spending on capital, and everybody sees what the effects of that around town. We're maintaining buildings better than we have in the past. And if you look at our total, we had one blip because of COVID. You'll see the purple line there had dipped in 21, but we're back up to something north of $2 million. And our total spend now is up around 6 or 4% of our total budget. It would be nice to get a little higher than that. I think some of the guidance says you ought to be spending at least 5% of your budget on capital. So we have a little work to do there to try to get that back up to where it ought to be, but certainly nothing like where it was back in 2006 and 2007 when we just were not maintaining our buildings, roads, sidewalks. We just weren't doing a very good job, but we're doing much better today. Next slide, please. And I think this is where Doug jumps in.
They leave it to me to talk about the budget process, and so just letting everyone know that it's essentially, it probably begins ends up being around a 6-month process, 6-7-month process. Meetings are starting now with all the departments, and again, this is for fiscal year 2025, so we're talking June of 2024 or July of 2024 through June of 2025. We start with all the major budgets, but we really meet with everybody in advance, and everything is, we design it to level fund in general with, some variance for inflation and for understanding things, and also understanding that contractual items tend to rise and that we can budget for those, but we don't set exactly what our goals are for those. Again, when we think about new projects, we have to think about are those the priorities for the town. Every line item in ad nauseum is reviewed, and as the various and sundry department heads can say, they all come before us and they've go through it at the subcommittee level and the main committee level. And, you know, there'll be questions about like, oh, well, why is this growing by 12% this year? And sadly, I'm the one who often is asking those questions, if not Dan or other members of the team. There's always somebody who's got some sort of issue to raise. We do begin presentations to town council and the finance committee from the subcommittee level and at the department level beginning in January. And that runs, you know, up until like 3 weeks before town meeting when we vote on things. Go on to the next slide. Give you a little of the timeline. So we're right now in the middle. It's great that we do the mid-September, late September, and the October is where we are now. We're really in the throes of trying to figure out where we are with receipts. We've met as a forecasting committee, as well as trying to understand what the schools will need in the years going forward, as well as the other major departments. We start this formal kickoff of the budget probably sometime in the next couple of weeks, where we're asking them to give guidance and understand what their budgetary constraints are. And then preparation really goes through that first part of the year. And that's really when the finance committee is like deeply in the weeds, and it's almost like, you know, almost like your CPAs, but just with a little past tax deadline time and a little earlier in the year. So all of us on the FinCom essentially, if you're a CPA, you're asking, it's doubly masochistic because you're doing work on the town and work on your job at the same time. With that, I believe it gives you a sense of the cycle of what we're working on. With that, I'll turn it over to Steve. Steve's going to take the glory. I took you through the process, and Steve's going to take you through the glory of fiscal year 24.
I did. Next slide, please, Sherry. I need the glory because I have to sit there in the scrutiny of all those budgets with FinCom. But I do think that to go back to the process, that the subcommittee work is crucial on both the town council part. I know school committee has subcommittees too that look at different things, and the finance committee. And we really do go through every line item on it. And I think that really is a big part of our success. And it's a great budget practice. So I think as we prepare for fiscal year 25, at this point is where we think about how our projections work for fiscal year 24. And we entered fiscal year 24. Dan mentioned the increased revenue, the revenue projections, which are the local receipts. And we look at them, Kevin and I are very conservative in that area, maybe too conservative. But we really are basing our conservatism based on what the Department of Revenue really wants to look at, in our opinion, as we present all these numbers to the state to get them approved so we can set a tax rate and get all of our free cash certified and things like that. And our policy that we adopted years ago, our financial policy, really does not want us to be volatile in looking at local revenues. So we have been inching that up. For this fiscal year, Kevin and I were at $7.5 million, and I'll say I had to bring Kevin along to that. And Dan was at around $9 million. So I think that we're slowly getting to meet somewhere in the middle, and maybe in a few years we'll be right with each other. But that has been a great success story for us. We really look at that and where we're going to go. New growth.
By the way, until then, we go by Price is Right rules, closest without going over.
Without going over. So yeah, exactly. New growth. So new growth is the additional tax levy revenue from new construction. So you think of it, when a new house is built on a vacant lot, that vacant lot was worth $200,000 and taxed at $200,000. Now you have a $700,000 house on it. So there's $500,000 in extra tax value you multiply that, and that gives us extra tax revenue. So Wakefield has seen a really big surgence in new construction, and you see it going on all the time. And we've been averaging around, 1.2, $1.3 million in new growth over the last few years. That's extra taxes, which really helps us fund all these programs, because 2.5% is the highest we can go on the other end. So it's hard to maintain a community on just 2.5% increase when, inflation is what, 4 or 5, and you have all of these other things that happen. So we have been forecasting for years the power line, the underground power line that came in, and we've been kicking it down the road because you don't get the new growth yet. They haven't completed everything, and I won't go into how different utilities are in the taxation. But this fiscal year, in fact, at our forecast meeting that we had a month ago, going forward for 25, we kicked almost the whole growth to the next fiscal year, thinking we weren't going to get any this fiscal year. But lo and behold, we did. So 1.4 million in new taxes are coming from the power line. That is a great help to us, because when you think about it, that power line does not put a great any additional services. They're not additional children in the school system. There aren't additional fire or police calls for the power line. This is really a great boon for the community, and let alone all the other money that we got for roads through it and what have you. So we also look at expanding programs, kind of look at the other side when we do our budgets. And certainly we had a lot of work to do in the schools to continue to make up for the learning loss during the pandemic. And we are, continuing to make sure that we, give our students and all of our people there as best we can for their education. We've also seen a lot of, priorities that the town council has set, particularly in the area of mental health services and public safety for the community. We also put some extra money into planning. So these are all things that we have to take account for in our fiscal year 24 and beyond. And in the back of our mind, the whole time is positioning ourselves for the long term, making sure we have those reserves, making sure we're funding our other post employment benefits, which is health insurance for retirees, making sure we're funding our pension, according to the schedule. So all these things that are in there, and maintaining our reserves, not only for the AAA bond rating and getting lower interest rate and helping the taxpayer there, but really to get ready in case there is a downturn. There may be a downturn sometime. We have been slowly increasing capital expenditures, trying to make, we're back over where we were before COVID. Those may recall that we did forego $1 million worth of capital because we didn't know what was going to happen with the pandemic. We had to be ready. But I will say the town council has been very prudent with the use of the ARPA funds, and has increased capital expenditures there by 3.8 million in this round, with another potential 2 million to go for something that might happen. So I think that if you added that, you could see we really are doing a lot in capital, and that's a lot of the sidewalks and the Veterans Hall Park parking lot area and trails and things like that are coming. Again, prudent maintenance of our reserves. I talk about this ad nauseum. For me to talk about it, but I get very excited. And we do use free cash to balance the budget. And basically, we build free cash by departments returning money to the town, and by in having revenues come in, particularly local receipts, more than what we budgeted for, which has helped us over the years. Next slide, please. And please, people, jump in. So where are we for this year? Real estate taxes, 86.3 million, which is really one of the few numbers we know going into setting the budget. We know what our real estate taxes were the year before. We may start off increasing that by 2.5%. So we know that number. Local receipts, again, we have Kevin and my number at 7.5. We have FinCom at 9.4 million. We're getting closer. Wakefield Municipal Gas and Light does pay us a payment in lieu of taxes payment, pilot program, $960,000. We know that. We have a schedule in advance for that. State aid last year was about 3.35 million, and I will talk about that in a second. The big two portions of state aid, of course, are Chapter 70 and unrestricted local aid. New growth is that wonderful number at 2.48 million. And we also have some other items, available funds, which are, cemetery, perpetual care at the cemetery lot sale, wetland filing fees, library offsets, as well as bus fees for the school department. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the revenue accounts. So in fiscal year 23, and I call it the Wakefield positive factor, Dan touched on it. We budgeted for 7 million, and to all our surprise, it came in at 9, and that was a big part of our, building up our free cash. Again, building permits was the biggest part of that. Also, investments, because of the rate increases. We have money on, deposit in the short term, and I think we budgeted $40,000 for it, because just think what you were getting in your checking account, 0.01%. And we got some extra money there, and that jumped up and really helped us a lot. Next slide, please. State update for fiscal year 24. Again, unrestricted local aid was 4 million. A good number. Chapter 70, we did receive some extra bunch from the extra money there, from a commitment from the state legislature to put more money into that. And that's 8.5 million. Charter school reimbursement. This is reimbursement for children that choose to go to charter schools. The majority of them, it's the charter school in Malden. We do get some money back from the state, about $500,000. And there are some other areas on the budget that we do get some money back, mainly, paying for some of the tax rebates that people get that are veterans, elderly, or blind. Now, state aid used to actually come out snail mail to the town, and it's called the cherry sheet. And it was called the cherry sheet, and I still call it the cherry sheet, because I think I'm old enough to remember when it did come out. It came out on red paper. So I think the key thing about the cherry sheet was when you looked at page 1, where you got your receipts, you had to flip to page 2 to show the assessments that were being charged to your community. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So MBTA, this is when I say final budget, this is the final budget from the state legislature, because this goes through a lot of iterations. And in fact, this past year, it wasn't even approved till the end of June. So we're setting our budget at a April or May town meeting based on what we collectively think is going to happen. Final budget is an assessment from the MBTA, and that is for the MBTA train station to run through our community. Charter school tuition. Now, you saw on the slide before where the state, gave us, $500,000 for charter school reimbursements, but they also charged us $1.6 million. So that to me is I went to the Hurd School, and so looks like we lost about 1.1 million there. And that is something that I am really looking very carefully with, and I'm concerned about. And Superintendent Dr. Lyons and I have had discussions, is that we really are, charter school, we're gonna have to really take a look at that, because we are getting an increase in Chapter 70, but if we're losing $1 million on the charter school side, that really bites into any increase we're gonna get to, provide education here in Wakefield. There's some other areas that are assessments from the state, including Registry of Motor Vehicles charge, MAPC charge, mosquito control charge, some other school charges. So, that's, they gave us, 13 million on one side, but took 2.5 million away. Next slide, please. So one thing I've been kind of playing with over the last few years is what is the net effect of state aid? So in fiscal year 23, our net was about $1 million. This year, it's 6.55 increase. So this was a 6.4 increase in state aid. Again, I think a big part is the increase in the charter school assessment. So I'm going to be really carefully looking at that, and it gives me a new clarion cry when I talk to our state delegation about we really need to make sure that that gets under control. So it's great to say, hey, we increased your chapter 70 by 10%. Fabulous. That's wonderful for the town of Wakefield. But if you took it back on page 2 of the cherry sheet, the net to us is not so good. So something we need to pay attention to. I want to maybe stop there if there's anybody who wants to comment on that before we go to a couple of other budget factors.
Yeah, I was going to say, if folks have any questions on the materials so far, or anything related to state aid, if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand with the raise hand icon. Ed.
Steve, that new growth number, 2.48 mil,
Yes.
is that certified by DOR or is that an estimate?
Yes, it is.
Very good. And that's up a couple $100,000 over the forecasted projection of 2.2. So that's very
Yeah, and that was actually the updated forecast because we weren't there before. This is when
Right.
we had the power line. Yeah, so it's 2.4.
okay. Thank you.
Doug, go ahead.
Sure. And Steve, I'm not sure that we have that information, and certainly not at our fingertips, but one of the things about the charter school tuition that is particularly egregious is if we look at the number of children, particularly who are going down to, and you can be coy about their name, who go to Mystic Valley, who go for 3 years and then come back to Wakefield. That's actually the part that I think is ridiculous. There are far too many parents who are defaulting to sending their kids there and then realizing that it's not as good an experience as they had hoped. So I just, that's my 2 cents. And again, appointed versus elected.
Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll keep going. Steve?
Thank you. So next slide, please, Sherry. So anyways, some of the budget factors as we're going forward, we're slowly getting to, building our budget for 2025, fiscal year 25, which I do agree with Town Council Chair Chines. It is kind of amazing to be saying that fiscal year 25 when we're really so feeling into 24, it seems. We do have a new governor who will be really getting her first total budget in. I mean, the first budget last year was kind of, the governor is elected and kind of comes in, and we actually get the budget figures a little bit late because the new governor gets a little bit more time. So it'll be interesting to see what the priorities are for, the new governor, Governor Healy, and to see where, where we're going to go. Now, we knew from before with Governor Baker, he was hard and fast with the cities and towns, and he said, he said, listen, if state revenue goes up 4%, I'm going to increase unrestricted local aid by 4%. And through his time period, that did happen. So it was a little bit easier to predict. So we're going to have to watch some of the tea leaves with what the new governor has to say there. We're also coming upon a number of union contracts this year. The 2 biggest unions on the municipal side, the police and fire, are their contracts expired on June 30th, 2023. I'm happy to say that I do believe we will have contracts at town meeting on those in November. And the teachers union is also contracts have expired. So those are some big budget factors that are going to affect fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 and beyond. So those are some things we're going to have to consider and make sure that we have, adequate revenue to cover it and we budget prudently around it. I'm also looking at local receipts on this year to date, this fiscal year. We can't really rest on our laurels of last year as good as they were. And the meals tax, which has been a real boom through the first quarter of the year. So these are as of 9/30, first quarter of the fiscal year being done. Meals tax are 130,000 to the town. Last year, for the same period of time, it was 109. So that's trending in the right direction as far as we're concerned. Year before, they were 98. So that seems to be a big upward trend in Wakefield. Hotel taxes, those have rebounded as well. Where those are 197 through this quarter. Last fiscal year, they were 184,000. And, the year before, they were at 98. So they have rebounded very well since the pandemic. Excise tax, and this is just the automobile portion, that has really, again, moving up very well. I think it was $312,000 last year at the same period of time. So that's increasing a little bit. The other one is building permits, and building permits are going at what I would consider to be a normal year through the first quarter. However, I will say that not included in that number of 155 is the Head of the Lake project, 200 Corner Powered Ave. They have pulled a demolition permit, not a building permit yet. And the building permit for that development is going to be somewhere in the $1 million range. So I foresee a pretty good year in building permits for this fiscal year, again, looking at where our receipts are going. And that'll kind of, color what we're going to do for next fiscal year. Next slide, please, Sherry. ARPA funds in Wakefield. And we talk a lot about ARPA funds, and we have, I think, very prudently, the town council has very prudently used a portion of the ARPA funds to cover some budgetary matters on an ongoing basis, and have also been very prudent about weaning off of them. So if you go to the next slide, you can show that for the past few fiscal years, we've been kind of using ARPA to kind of help bridge some of the gaps, and ratcheting down the schools, going from 400 to 363 to 200,000 the last round. Town council using a little bit. Health, we did a lot of work in the health budget, increasing services, particularly social workers and things like that. We went from 145,000 in 23 to a mere 50,000 in 24, supplementing the health budget, I might say, with opioid money that's going to run for a long time from the opioid settlements. So we are kind of, working things into the tax levy and looking at it in a very prudent manner. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, before we get to this, I will say on ARPA funds, I mentioned that we had used $3.8 million to on capital projects for the main part. There is about $2 million left that the town council will be looking at and working with through the next through this fiscal year, knowing that the ARPA funds need to be appropriated by December 31st, 2024, or else they're supposedly supposed to be returned to the federal government. And I do think that you'll be seeing some more ARPA usage in that time, or designation at least, because there's a few years after that to take care of that. And before we jump over to Dr. Lyons, I'm ready for any questions or comments on that section.
Great. Any questions from the group? All right. Seeing none, Dr. Lyons, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us here tonight. I want to start off straight away by just talking about FY 24 and 25. One of the biggest things we're working on right now is settling the teacher contract. We are, and we have really tried to prioritize for the last two years in preparation for this, costs for labor, right? And so the teachers do not yet have a new contract. They're working under the old contract until we get a new contract in place at this point in time. We are meeting next week, and we are optimistic that we are going to get this squared away in the coming weeks. That's our plan. We still have some hurdles to get over, but we are looking forward to doing this work with the WA leaders. The other piece here that I can't stress enough is, in addition to the cost of labor, is what is changing in education. Jobs that we used to post and get 300 applicants for, we're now getting 25 or 30. And those are elementary jobs. Other jobs we're getting no applicants for. Certain teaching positions, counseling positions, school psychology positions. They are really, really difficult to hire. You know, if we get 1 or 2 applicants, we're very, very fortunate. We've been very, our administrators, our principals in particular, that have hired at the school level have been very creative. And a lot of the hires that we've been able to make have come through pre-existing relationships. And a lot of that is because we do have an intact leadership team that has been in place now for a number of years. So we need to continue to create ways to offset costs as well. One of the things that we've done is we've secured funding for certain positions. For example, we've partnered with the local Board of Health and Human Services, secured a grant in partnership with Melrose and Stoneham, and we've secured a new a counselor for the high school for the next 2 years. Doing things like that are things that we're going to need to do more and more of to offset costs, but also to be strategic about how to fund things differently, right? We're also looking at mitigation strategies, right? Not only working to secure grants, but also partnering with other districts or thinking about different ways to fund things. We're going to be continuing to develop and invest in special education programming. This is critically important. This is critically important. The pipeline to send students to out of school or out of district placements has been profoundly disrupted because of COVID. The idea that we used to be able to place a student for a longer term assessment and then work with the family to get them placed in an out of district school is becoming increasingly difficult. And when those placements are available, the costs have in some instances gone up by 50%. And what is also happening is that the receiving schools are also charging, breaking out charges differently. For example, if we are sending a student and they need support, the receiving school will say, you know, we think the student needs paraeducator support, so we're going to charge that back to the district in addition to transportation costs. So what we're looking at and what we need to continue to do and be very clear about also in our forecasting and scenarios moving forward is if it costs to develop these programs, what is the cost and what is the savings? So there is a benefit, there's a cost benefit to that, but there's also an outlay of cash to do that. So we're going to need to continue to talk about that. We also need to collaborate to complete the new high school and to communicate about pre-K and elementary needs. Right now, our pre-K and kindergarten classes are really fully enrolled. So our pre-K is so full, we have 2 pilot classrooms that are an extension from our pre-K that are running at Woodville Elementary School. That's important to note. One of the things that I've talked to Steve about is really the possibility of looking at space needs at pre-K and kindergarten, but especially at pre-K. For example, at Doyle, we're providing therapeutic supports in regard to speech and occupational therapy, often in the principal's office or the nurse's office. And the nurse will move into the principal's office and the principal will move into a classroom and work there while a class is going on, just because space is so tight. So we need to kind of reflect that back to the town and just be clear about what the needs are moving forward and how we might address that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to just get a picture of the new high school in here. and really say thank you for all of the support and kind of partnership work that we've been able to do. I think we've been very, very grateful. We had a meeting with MSBA on Monday. The board of directors met on Wednesday, and we've learned that they have increased our square footage price to build the school. And also they've increased the square footage price for our site work that will be a benefit to Wakefield. We're still working on the exact numbers. Steve, I thought you had an estimate of that?
Yeah, a real back of the envelope estimate, and it's going to depend a lot upon, what happens when you put a shovel in the ground, right? But it is possible that we'd be looking at probably a increase of reimbursement from the state of about $15 million.
Thank you so much.
Nothing to sneeze at.
No, no, no. Every little bit helps. And so, we're grateful for all of the support and the partnership work that we've been able to do so far to get and secure funding for the new high school. It's not missed on us. We're also kind of walking a line where we have an increase in student needs and also an increase in the cost of labor, which we really just need to be very candid about and be clear about the costs of what contracts are going to be when we settle the teacher's contract. More information to follow there. Next slide, please. I just wanted to just take a snapshot and do a look back on FY 23 and 24. And Steve alluded to this. And really the point that I want to make here on these two slides are the highlighted sections in yellow, because what's important to know is what is the cost to our tax base. When we go to our spring town meeting and we're looking at a base budget. For the last 4 years, our budgets have been increased with ARPA funds. So we've really been operating, our base budgets have truly been in the 5%, 5.22. Last year, we were at 5.22. And we were able to, when ARPA money came over to the town at the end of the year, we were able to kind of have some other savings and to give that, return that to the town. And that's something that I can talk more about as we go through this. Next slide, please. So we're looking very closely at grants. ESSER for us is on the school side what ARPA is on the town side. And so the total grant was $822,000. The remaining funds for this academic year are funding paraeducator positions that we've needed to increase to support students. So that's something that we're going to need to look very closely at, because to fund those positions are going to need to move into the regular budget. For the last 3 years, we've secured an acceleration grant from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. This has been a huge windfall for us, because what it does is it allows our kindergarten students to come into school early in very small class sizes. We split the classes in half, and they come in over a 2-week period, and they get acclimated to the school. They learn the routines, they learn who the students are in their classes. And it's really been a very, very positive event post-COVID to really help students get in and hit the ground running, if you will. And so that's been something that we've really appreciated, but that's grant funded. And if that grant sunsets, we're really going to need to look at that. And that's a possible cost increase in our budget as well. Our Title I grant, I make note of this because our Title I grant, when I started here 9 years ago, was double this. It's been cut by 50%, right? And that's based on the last round of census information as to why it was cut. Our special education grant is $1 million. That has been pretty consistent for the last number of years. I want to kind of highlight just some numbers so people know when we talk about increase in needs, it's not just because of COVID. 10 years ago, the percentage of students in special education was about 14.8%. Currently this year, 10 years later, a decade later, we're at about 18% and rising. Our number of EL students, our English language learners, students that have come into the district whose first language is not English, we need to provide support for them so that they can learn the language, learn English, and use English to learn the curriculum, right? So they're learning kind of on two parallel planes, which is critical. But 10 years ago, we had 20 students we had 20 EL students in Wakefield. Today we have 103. So just some references to think about. Also, low-income students, students that have the designation of low income. That's a state designation. 10 years ago, 9.7% of our population was low income. Currently, in our student base, it's 17%. So as these things kind of sink in, you start to realize the needs and how they're changing, and also how the needs in classrooms are also being kind of passed on to teachers and the work that they're doing. Next slide, please. So we always talk about knowns and unknowns. Knowns, hiring and personnel shortages. Labor's ruling the roost right now. We need to kind of secure the teacher contract, and we need to be aggressive in this space. We also need to be creative and aggressive in regard to personnel shortages. We need to look at the increased special education needs and the number of evaluations year over year, so that we can do a better job providing scenarios to FinCom and to the town so that we're forecasting a little bit more closely in regard to our special education costs. I'll say more about that as we go through this. I've talked about the increased English language learners, additional FTEs. We've increased our number of nurses. Nursing positions are very, very hard to fill. Nurses are at a premium right now. We've secured a few nurses that have just gone to other positions, to traveling nurse positions into hospitals where they're making almost 100% more than they were making in our schools. Service providers are critically important for students that need special services. And facility costs have also increased. So these are knowns, right? These are known increases. Curriculum and professional development needs. As student needs have changed, we have kind of a path and a curriculum renewal cycle and a professional development cycle. As student changes have needs, we also need to look closely on how we are supporting teachers to get coached up to best meet the needs of students. In terms of unknowns, is really the out-of-district costs went up this year, in some instances beyond places that we ever thought that they could go up in ratio to the overall cost. That's something that we need to look at. Counseling and social emotional learning costs. There has been an increase in kind of the behavioral health needs of students and social emotional costs, and the need for increased counseling, both in school and outside of school, right? We often collaborate with providers in school and outside of school. Service providers, I shared kind of, speech and language pathology, OT/PT. It's very, very difficult to kind of get service providers in these spaces, and we're going to be looking closely at that. With the 100 students that we have in place, they're coming from families that need translation services as well as transportation. We're also watching very closely the trend across the state as migrant families are being placed in towns, and how that's impacting the schools and the overall municipality. I've talked with Steve, and we've kind of worked very closely on this. We're also looking at state support, right? And so for example, as Chapter 70 went up by $700,000, our Title I funds are decreased. So sometimes what looks like a great gain in one area, when it's reduced in another area, the net add sometimes is not what it looks like on paper. So we need to talk more about that while we're working on our budget with school committee and our FinCom partners. Next slide, please. I included this slide because I believe that this captures and summarizes kind of the new way of doing business, and something that we're looking very closely at and we take very seriously. This is the guidance from our school committee and our finance subcommittee specifically And it's also based on feedback that we've gotten from our FinCom liaisons, our subgroup, or our subcommittee from FinCom. So, we've been charged with assessing possible reductions where and whenever possible, and looking at chargebacks from revolving accounts. We've talked about the way in which we are reporting and presenting our budget, proposed information versus actual, positive and negative kind of amounts. We need to do a better job communicating that. Determine, if possible, the ability to share funds back at the end of the fiscal year. This is something that is big for us. So I want to be clear that the funds that were shared back at the end of last year did not come from the regular budget. They came from ARPA, and they also came from revolving accounts in terms of chargebacks. And so we're going to continue to look at that and think creatively about how we might kind of meet that expectation, but there'll be more information to follow there. We also need to collaborate with our subcommittees regarding budget scenarios and forecasting, right? I can tell you that I greatly value the relationships that we have forged with the FinCom subcommittee, as well as our finance subcommittee from school committee. And I think I speak for our school committee members when I say they value the relationships that we've forged with the FinCom subcommittee as well. So, so we'll continue to rely on those relationships and build those relationships. Is there any questions before I move on? Thank you. Next slide, please. So the next few slides just really cover challenges. School and cyber safety. School safety is as important today as it ever has been. You look at the events that are happening around the world. You look at what's happening in Maine. People are feeling very unsettled and unsafe right now. And we're seeing kind of things that we never thought we would see. And so it has been kind of a charge of all school leaders to really think about how we can keep students safe. So that's something that you will hear more from us on. We need to look at how we are talking about achievement, equity, and opportunity gaps in regard to really talking about where students are starting and where they're ending, instead of just looking kind of in a summative space around, students are all scoring at this level. If we're not clear about where students start, it's really hard to understand the genuine growth that some of our students are making. If you're an English language learner and you're mastering the English language while you're also learning the curriculum, and you're getting a needs improvement in a tested area, in an MCAS area, but you weren't even in the game because you didn't know the language, that can indicate profound growth. So those are the types of things we need to be a little bit more clear in regard to our communication. Human resources. This has been repeated, and I won't say more about that. But we need to be really clear about the costs of labor across the board. And so developing a facilities master plan, I've talked about this before. As the high school comes online, the only building left in the town that hasn't been looked at very closely is Greenwood. And the reality is that a lot of the spaces at Greenwood are not ADA accessible. The heating and cooling systems at Greenwood, there are no cooling systems at Greenwood. As things become more and more warm, and as the globe warms, heating and cooling are going to be a requisite of building spaces. So I just want to put a future agenda item for us to really think about the Greenwood Elementary School and also kind of the preschool spaces, because we're going to need those spaces to be improved to meet the needs of students and labor. Next slide, please. So things that we're really looking to, challenges and beyond: increasing high school opportunities for early college and internships, increase course offerings in STEAM and computer science at all. Our Joanne Marks, our our science curriculum coordinator, just secured a planning grant for computer science curriculum work. And that's exactly the type of thing that I mean about us being aggressive and getting grants to set up our work. That's indicated in bullet 2. The last bullet, we need to kind of continue to look at acceleration academies. We also need to think about how we might provide support for students outside of the school day. If we don't provide supports for students and they continue to fall behind, we really run the risk of paying a greater price than it would cost to provide tutoring in the after-school setting. More to follow there. We've talked about extended day and extended year for intervention services, and really just healthy and safe school environments that include counseling or increased counseling services or access to counseling services and student support services. This is kind of a lot of information to kind of process. I'm happy to address any questions that anyone may have at this point in time.
Thank you, Dr. Lyons, and thank you in particular. I think sharing the statistics around the growth in the number of students in special education, ELL, and low-income students, that was particularly eye-opening to me to see those numbers in relief. Any questions or comments from anyone in the group? I do see a hand up, Councillor McLean.
Superintendent Lyons, I think it was probably a year or so ago, we were meeting and I indicated that it looked like our general employee retention was very good. And you had indicated, I believe, that we had the best retention in the Middlesex League. Now I understand that there are certain hard to hire, situations that you've mentioned, but in terms of general retention, how are we doing?
I think our retention rates are very strong. We're in the low 80% mark. We were a little bit higher than that. I still think it's probably number 1 or number 2 in the Middlesex League. So I think it's very positive. I want to say the 82 or 83% at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Mr. Butler.
Oh, my camera again. No, Superintendent Lyons, I think the thing that is always surprising for everyone involved is, did the calculation really change over the past, 10 or 15 years for how they define low income students? Just because it feels the town has gotten decidedly more expensive to live in, and is definitely a place that is much more expensive than it was 20 years ago. And it's surprising that our percentage of low income students has risen as dramatically as it has.
I don't believe that they've changed the formula, Doug. I can double check on that and get back to you.
Anyone else before we move on? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Dr. Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. Chines.
I think Mr. Mayo, are you up next?
Yes, I think so. So I thought, we talked a little bit there, and we've kind of talked about this all the way through about some budgeting best practices. And, we do kind of talk about the budget all year long. And I think the scrutiny on the town council, school committee, and finance committee makes a big difference. But from a macro sense, then I'll go into a micro one. Kind of a macro sense, one thing we do that not every other community, I think, does is multi-year forecasting. And when I say multi-year, I have to give Dan Sherman so much credit. I think we're out to maybe 2035, Dan, or somewhere around there, of making assumptions and if trends this way or trends that way, what's going to happen. And really we're looking, can we sustain the programs we want? Can we grow the programs we want? And will we have adequate reserves? And I got to say that the forecasting subcommittee of the finance committee, I think we have I'll say we have a lot of fun. I know that sounds kind of strange to the public, but we have a lot of fun when Dan puts up his spreadsheet. We make assumptions and it goes across. And what does this mean? What does that mean? And but I think a big part of our success is because of that. And we do that. And I know we have the envy of a lot of other communities. The other items as we go through are some things that Dr. Lyons talked about. And I think we really have to look very closely at this on all of our grants, whether it's municipal, town side, or school side. And we don't really use those terminologies, but I think we're all in the same boat together. Is really look at total cost, including benefits, charged to programs through revolving accounts or grants, because there are some soft costs on any program that comes in that maybe is covered by a grant or covered by revolving accounts that leak over into the tax levy side, and that makes it harder to deliver tax levy money to the other programs that aren't supported by grants. And we're looking at that or revolving accounts all over the place there. One thing, the other thing that we look at is adherence to a well-planned financial policy. And I will tell you that, I think we adopted the policy and made town council made an amendment to it last winter, December of 2022, that may come into play this fall. So stay tuned on that, which will really help out the taxpayers. But I will tell you that the financial policy that we have that talks about what we should have for reserves, talks about what we should be spending on capital. It talks about how we should be handling revenues coming in. Really resonates with the bond rating agencies, and they actually read it, challenge me on it in our surveillance calls, and they'll say, Steve, it's talking about paying down some of your debt. I'm not so sure you hit all this in your financial policy. So we have to talk about that and going through it. Prudent utilization of outside revenue sources. Superintendent touched on it, and we touched on it. We do go after every grant and even the ARPA funds, that infrastructure grant, but we need to use them prudently. We can't start up a program as wonderful as it is and have no way of moving forward when that grant dries up. So we really look at that very carefully, and I think town council has been very prudent in making sure that the ARPA funds are really leaving a legacy for the community. The other is that I spend a lot of time doing, and I know we talk about this in the office here with finance committee members, and Kevin and I talk about it, is review of state trends. And I'm a little bit nervous in this area going into the next fiscal year. Revenues at the state through the first quarter of this year are up basically 1% over last year. That's not a huge increase. But what is even a little bit more concerning to me is that state revenues are not meeting the benchmarks that the state had set out when they set out their budget, in July, falling short of the benchmark of about 2%. The Division of Local Services, or the DOR, prints out those, every month, or every really twice a month, gives you where the state coffers, how they've done with their money coming in. And through the first quarter, we're not knocking the socks off there at the state level. So we're going to have to take a look at that and see as we set the budgets in year going forward, because state aid is still a good percentage of our budget. But, unlike some of the gateway cities that are looking at, 50, 60% of their budget being controlled or being, funded by the state, we're at a much better level than that at about, 10%. So we might get a cold if the state gets sick. Some of these other communities will get pneumonia. So we look at all those on a macro level. But then I think about this as a micro level. This is really where the rubber meets the road. So can you put the next slide, please? So we really have a careful budget review, and I think that Vice Chair Butler said ad nauseum, we look at them. But I think that that's what makes us great, is that we really look at every budget line item. We look at what is contractual and what is worth discretionary spending. And when I say that every line item is looked at by the finance committee, by the subcommittees, by the liaisons from the town council, by the town council, I am telling you the exact truth. Why did postage go up over last year? Postage didn't go up. Why didn't it go up? Maybe you could, get rid of that. And I think that that's, really makes, there's no going along to get along here. We make sure that we are putting the best, program forward to meet our priorities and give the taxpayer the best bang for their buck. A lot of time that I have spent kibitzing with the finance committee, particularly on, is what is a capital and what is an operational expense. And we have moved a number of items when you think about maybe software expenses. When you upgrade your computer, that software expense probably should be, those upgrades probably should go into operations so you count for it. Probably shouldn't be capital. So we've had a lot of fun with that, but I do think that makes us stronger. I mentioned subcommittee scrutiny, and that is key. Another thing that I look at, and we look at it, is trend analysis. And this is in the individual budgets. And I personally, and I think Kevin and I are on the same page in this, we do not have a use it or lose it mentality. And I think there's a lot of places where they'll say, geez, I've got $2,000 left in my supply line item. It's June 30th. And I've talked to people that have been at town hall for years, and they would spend it all on that second last or the last warrant of the year. And we would have boxes of paper clips and rubber bands and things that I'm probably still using them after being here for 15 years because they were bought before. We've decided to tell our department heads, we're going to look for a trend, but if you didn't use all of your supply items and because you didn't need it for whatever reason, don't get nervous. We'll talk about it. We may ratchet it down as we go, but don't just spend it for the sake of spending it. And I think that has resonated and has, shown that our, departments really return, good money to the town. This year in particular was really good across the board. Our last fiscal year, really good across the board. And I think that our department heads appreciate that. Any questions before we move on to the next few slides? Mr. Chairman, anything? I don't see.
I'm not seeing any hands up, so why don't we, let's move on.
Okay, perfect. Forecasting for future years, I think there will be an inflation factor. Inflation is back. We're going to have to account for that. Inflation adds, certainly to our contracts and our wages across the board everywhere. And it also adds everywhere. It adds to, from, copy paper, not that we use that much anymore, but to curbing and asphalt and energy, gasoline, diesel fuel for our engines, electricity. So these are things we're going to have to look at. I'm going to start looking personally at net state aid, and I'm going to start at a steady 5% per year. I'm hoping that stays, and hopefully I'll be wrong. That's a good point for us all to argue. That's my money. That's my number, and we can certainly talk about that. Local receipts have certainly rebounded, and I think that Mr. Sherman's forecast is around 4% a year, moving those forward. We hope to come to some sort of a meeting of getting a little bit closer with those numbers. Although we always win Kevin always wins the Price is Right because he's always the lowest. New growth, I think, will remain steady. We're not going to see another 2.4 million, but I think we do have enough construction going around that we're going to be in that $1 million range per year. One thing that we haven't talked about, but is going to become more of a factor, is energy efficiencies. Wakefield is a green community. We did get some grants for that to help make some efficiencies on some of our buildings. That not only, has is more efficient and better for the planet, but is saving us money in the long run in heating and cooling. So those are things that we're going to look forward to, and I think that is going to help us offset some of those inflation items. I'm still looking to maintain, and this is an overall increase, 3 to 4 increases in all budgets. That does become difficult with wage contracts. We may have to look elsewhere, but that's where we're going to start. And again, looking to there are federal dollars out there. They are tied, but we've been doing a lot of grant writing to get them, and there are federal funds that sometimes are federal or run through the state, and we really, they can do some great projects, from a whole sidewalk connecting a neighborhood to the downtown, which increases our capital, to the train tracks on Broadway, so we don't have to spend our own town funds for that, to running programs that, whether it's at the schools or in the town. So that's something we're going to be keep looking at, and to enhance our budgets around here. So I think probably we can go to Dan Sherman for the next couple slides and talk about how what does this all mean?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so putting together my crystal ball, trying to figure out where this goes for expenditures and income. Here's my forecast, and Steve, you're right. It's a 10-year forecast I run. So this is the final numbers here is 2033, because I actually start with 24. So it's 10 years inclusive. So on the expenditure side, this is really what the budget amount. And you'll see that for 24, we expect a small surplus, about $500,000. And then it becomes a deficit, but it's really not a deficit, because the expenditures is the budget amount, and we have in this crystal ball some money's coming back from the departments. They've been pretty steady over the years. Some years are bigger than others, but what I've included is about $1 million coming back from departments from various sources. And we talked about what happened in 23 at the beginning of this session. So basically, it looks like going forward, we're at a steady state. And you can see the increase in cost, the increase in income, and everything that I'm seeing points to roughly a 4% increase on an annual basis for both income and expense. So that's where that's tracking now. A much better picture than we had just last May. And we've already talked about all the reasons why the numbers are so much better than what we expected. And it's all good news. So this part looks much better. Next slide, please. So in terms of reserves, what it means going forward is roughly on free cash at 8.6 million is where we finished. Stabilization is at 3.2, and it comes in at roughly 11.8 million, and a little over 10% as a percentage of the total budget. And then going forward, we're going to have a little bit of an increase in free cash. We expect to put more money into stabilization starting a couple of, maybe in 25, 26, and 27. But as a percentage, I'm seeing right now a little uptick to about 11% in terms of our reserves versus our budget. And then it decreases. And it gets down to, at the year fiscal year 33, it's roughly 9.6%. And if you want to round it to 10, I think that's where we're at. So as long as the free cash gives a little creep and stabilization gives a little creep to keep track with the budget, we should be hovering right around our 10% policy goal of reserves versus our budget. So again, this is another much better picture than what I was painting last May. I've been sleeping a lot better the last couple of weeks. And I'd be happy to take any questions on our forecast.
Thank you, Dan. I actually have one question if I can kick it off. Sherry, do you mind going back one slide? Dan, I'm just curious, on the forecast for fiscal 2026, you've got about a percentage point increase in cost. Could you speak a little bit about that if you recall what that's from?
I can bring it up because I happen to have the forecast in front of me. You said it was 26?
Yep, 2026, you've got costs increasing at 4.98% compared to, generally hovering around 4 each of the other
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. That is the regional VOC. The
Got it.
cost of the VOC hit us in 26, so that's why there's a bump there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions from the group? All right, seeing none, I think, Steve, are you up next?
Yeah, I think that we have town meeting coming up on November 18th. Item number 1 will be the town report, which really goes again painstakingly department by department on how they ended up fiscal year 2023. And that report is basically completed. It will be on the town website, I think, within a few days, beginning of next week, I would think. And the townspeople can really see and get any questions into us. And it really does show what we've been talking about, how the departments returned money to the town, department held over some money, encumbered money to be used the next fiscal year, mainly for capital projects and audits and things like that. So it is really a very it's very good read, and it will be also available at town meeting, but we like to get that out, a few weeks ahead of time so people can really see it and look at it. Article 2 will be free cash use. We will use some free cash to balance the budget, as we've talked about. And we will have a lot to say about that at the town council meeting over the next couple meetings before town meeting. Tax relief, I'm really excited about, I think this is Article 6, which is really going to increase some of the tax relief to some of our more vulnerable citizens. And it's really is what town council's talked about is targeted tax relief. And this is going to help people increase the exemptions, double the exemptions actually, for those that are blind, those are surviving spouses, those that are elderly, and for veterans. And this really is a feel-good article that really does help some of our people afford to, age in place in Wakefield and make their home a little bit more affordable. You couple some of those with the circuit breaker work that we've done over the last few years, and I feel really very good about that. That should be it's a really nice article, and will help out a lot of people. And our assessor Victor Santinello has done a great job on that. I am hoping that to have 3 contracts at town meeting. There are 2 police unions and 1 fire union. Hoping that we're very, very close, and hopefully we'll get those done. And then we'll have everybody under contract. And I know that on the school side, Dr. Lyons and his team is working very closely with the teachers, and hopeful that they're very close too, because it is much better for our personnel and much better for us for budget purposes to have them done in a manner that's fair for everybody. The last article, Article 7, is, we call it the Stretchier Energy Code. And really what that article is that is really adopting a code, really confirming our commitment as the town to achieving a cleaner and more efficient energy community by adopting the specialized energy code. I know we call it Stretchier just to be, I guess, a little bit fun. And the real goal is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector by 2050. And that's it. That is town meeting. 7 articles. It does start at 8 a.m. Saturday, November 18th. And I hear that there will be coffee and muffin and donuts in the cafeteria, I think by the Greenwood PTO before the meeting. So I intend to get there, around 7 o'clock and enjoy a cup of coffee and have some camaraderie there. So it should be a nice morning. And then we will really hit the ground running for fiscal year 25, hopefully with a little bit more, information on where the state is going. So it'll really be great. So that's it for me. And I think we can questions and comments, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Let's open it up. Anyone who has any questions or comments about any of the content tonight or anything about the process going forward? We are a quiet group tonight. That's very unusual for a town council meeting. Let me ask Chair Lehman or Vice Chair Butler, any sort of closing thoughts from either of your perspectives? No? Okay, seeing some shaking heads. All right. Well, I just want to just say a couple of thank yous before we formally adjourn for the evening. First of all, I do want to thank Sherry Dalton and the team at WCAT. So even though we are meeting virtually, this is actually not an easy meeting to put together. It's a big meeting. It involves coordinating a lot of folks. And, as always, WCAT and Sherry have done a great job. So thank you to everyone for making this happen and allowing us to have this discussion. I also want to thank everyone from the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Town Council who's in attendance here tonight. Steve talked about, best practices in budgeting, and I really do think that one of the best practices that we follow is bringing our boards together to really level set, what our financial situation is before we go into the budget process, to share some information transparently, and also share information about the process. So we're all starting with the same level of knowledge, so that we're able to, provide the scrutiny, ask the difficult questions, that's so important to the process. So I really appreciate everyone for being here today and for your engagement throughout the process. I know we're going to have a lot of really lengthy discussions, difficult discussions, and interesting discussions. But I know I, for one, am looking forward to that and looking forward to being able to present a budget to town meeting that we'll all be proud of. So with that, last call for any questions or comments. No? All right, seeing none, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Is there a second? Thank you. Is there any objection to the motion that's been made and seconded to adjourn? Seeing none, well, thank you again to everyone for joining us tonight. Appreciate the conversation. Steve and Doug, thank you to you and your teams for putting together all of the information. And wish everyone a great evening. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night.